Welcome back to Candid Conversations.
Oh, it's good to be back in the studio, Chris.
It is. It's really good. And today we have a really special guest.
Let's hear more about it.
Yeah, Tekita Bankhead is a global DEI strategist, speaker, writer, and educational consultant with expertise in program development, culturally affirming mental health outreach, dialogic learning, and community engagement. She currently serves as the Director of Access and Community at the Gies College of Business at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Previously, she has served in other leadership roles at Illinois as the director of the Bruce D. Nesbitt African American Cultural Center, BNAC, and as a specialist in education at the Counseling Center. Tekita earned her Master of Science in Counselor Education, Student Affairs Administration from Mississippi State University, and is a registered nurse with a Bachelor of Nursing from Mississippi University for Women. Welcome to the show, Tekita.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you on the show, and it kind of feels like the universe has conspired against us.
I know.
This is our third scheduled time to do this. First, you were sick, then I wasn't feeling particularly well. If any of you are noticing a little bit of a frog in my voice, I'm just getting over some kind of allergy response to the spring trees and things like that. So, but we're really glad that we're finally in the studio to have this really amazing conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I want to kick us off. If you can just tell us about your journey and what you've learned about leadership along the way, maybe highlight some key pivotal moments of your career.
Mm-hmm. So I always start with my undergraduate and graduate journeys because I think that they shaped a lot of my leadership. People are always asking me, like, how are you working in higher ed, doing DEI work, and you're a nurse? Like, where do those two even come together? And so for me, I actually kind of fell into higher education, which is a similar story for a lot of people. And it happened when I was having a semester off from nursing school, actually. I had a really rough semester and I ended up failing by 1/2 point, which to a normal student is like, what? And it's like, yeah, it's possible. It puts you back an entire year. And I actually got super involved in a lot of my student leadership, and due to a mentor, was introduced to higher ed and actually realized it was a much better fit for me. And I realized that you can really make a powerful transformation from failure. And so I think that was one of the most pivotal leadership lessons, I think, that kind of really trickled along and followed me throughout the rest of my journey. So most of my journey from there, I think I was really focused on how do I make people who don't necessarily think that they're leaders tap into their leadership potential and lead in spaces where they may not have always felt welcome. In my graduate program, I was the only Black person. And I think that also helped me understand, like, how do you tap into your strengths and let people know that you can use them in a way that is unique, probably use them in a way that other people might not be used to or ready for. And I think that is another theme that has just kind of happened throughout my leadership. So I think the two main themes are really like ending up in places that I didn't expect to be, and then figuring out how to make the best of what I can give to the space while I'm there. And so I ended up at Illinois. I came in 2015. And so I've been here for the most part for about 10 years. And I came from a housing and residence life background. So super student focused, living with students, which is
a thing.
Like you can only do that for so long unless you are a res lifer, and I am not. And so I was like, I really want to work with a more specialized population. And again, randomly found out about a position that was open as an assistant director at BNAC. And so when I got the role, super excited, even though I had vowed that I'd never live in the Midwest. I don't know why. I was like, I just don't see it happening. And I remember when I started, the university was going through a really interesting time in 2015. So my very first week, we were on I remember this super vividly. We were on the front page of the Chronicle 3 Fridays in a row because the chancellor resigned, and then I think the provost or someone had stepped down, and then it was the athletic director or someone. And I was like, what is happening? Like, what did I walk into?
It was a very tumultuous time.
It was a huge transition time. And then on a personal level at the center, the director, who I'm still great friends with today, he ended up leaving like right after I came. So I was like, okay, what did I walk into? But it worked out really, really well. I ended up having an interim supervisor and then eventually got another director. But because I was thrown into, honestly, what felt like such a shaky start, I really had to learn the power of relationships. And so I literally had to hit the pavement and just say, okay, hey, do you work with BNAC? If not, like, should we, what do you do? And that was really the power of how I built my network. So from there, I think that carried me into lots of other opportunities in the university. And I really think it kind of helped lay the trajectory for like where I was able to get involved, where I was able to get continued development. And then that has led me to the counseling center, where I worked with the ACIP program. So again, I think it was a nice segue going from working in res life living with students to telling them not to drink when they get on campus, because I worked a lot with the ACIP program. And so that was really inside. It was helpful because it was a lot of large scale program management, but I still got to have the student interaction. And then the pandemic happened. So that was where I actually learned a lot of my tech skills and learned how to make literally everything virtual and learned how to like transform these huge programs and make them virtual. And so fast forward to that, the pandemic is happening. I end up going back to BNAC as the director, and then ended up having to move home, which I'll talk a little bit more about some of those pieces. Yeah. And now once I was like, I don't want to be in Mississippi, came back. I have been back at Illinois now, because it just felt like home for real for me. So I've been at Gies now for over a year and a half, which is wild because that has happened really, really fast, and started with the role as the director of DEI, and we've transformed and expanded our area, which I could talk a little bit more about as well. So now I serve as the director of access and community. So it's been a long and windy road, but I think it makes sense. And I think it again, it's been unexpected, but still very purposeful in all the best ways.
So you've worked in nursing, you've worked in mental health advocacy, and you've worked in education now. Like, how have these different experiences shaped you as a leader?
I think more than anything, it's taught me how to really be very human-centered. When you're dealing with people, when they are unsure, when they're afraid, when they don't feel well, when they are sometimes going through some of the most difficult moments of their life, I think it helps you really have a clear idea of what really matters, and how you want to interact and support people in that way. And so I think the common theme of just having this thread of helping professions has really defined how I approach leadership. I'm not a person who's super task oriented. I'm not a person who is, I don't think I'm strict. I hope my other direct reports wouldn't describe me in that way. But I believe in grace and flexibility, and I believe in being someone who gives that freely and gives trust freely, because I think that when you build an environment that centers that, I think people want to be their best self, and by being their best self, they become the best employee that they can be.
Tell me more a little bit more about giving trust freely. I want to kind of understand that, because I think a lot of people don't give trust until the person has been proven trustworthy. How do you do that in daily practice?
Yeah. So in my belief, I think that not giving trust freely is often a reflection of our own trauma. And sometimes the trauma that we bring into workspaces or even just from past experiences. And being trauma informed means to try to create a space where people don't necessarily come in feeling as if they have to prove or defend something that is probably natural for them. So when I say give trust freely, I try to create a space where I tell people, you're in this role. I trust you to do this role. I trust that you can do it well because I hired you. And so I want to give you the space to soar as opposed to me waiting for you to fail. I notice that when I'm working with people who, especially women, honestly, there are oftentimes experiences where they've had lots of workplace trauma, where they felt as if their value wasn't seen. They felt as if their skills weren't necessarily recognized in the way that they thought it would. And so they're coming in a little bit with this often unconscious need to kind of say, okay, I need to prove that I belong here. I need to prove that I should be here, when I want to set the tone that if you're here, then you belong here. And so I don't want you to feel that you need to prove that, because I think that adds an added burden that won't necessarily help your performance at all.
Yeah, belonging is not earned. It's just the default state.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think because and I often tell that to students as well. We when I worked with BNAC, we have a traditional ceremony called Wake Up Call, where all of the first year students all kind of get together. And we often tell them, like, this is probably one of the few times on campus where Black students will see each other at this predominantly white campus. So we're like, look around the room and think about what that looks like. But we really try to affirm that if you were admitted to the institution, then you belong here. And so even as you venture into other spaces where you may not necessarily see people who look like you, knowing that your acceptance into the university proved that you can be successful here. And so it helps them to not doubt that later.
Great. Thank you.
So I know that you're doing that and you're doing this and you have background of how to create those spaces. How can you encourage like educational institutions to create a space where it's open and free, where you have all these multiple perspectives without causing harm or silencing some voices that may seem like they're going against the grain?
I wish I had the answer. That one. Especially now, you know, I think particularly our institutions are grappling with who their loyalty is to. And what I mean by that, I think that institutions, of course, have their primary obligation is to run a successful institution that gives everyone a high quality educational experience. I think sometimes it's often hard for them to also know that an equal priority should be the people who are running the university, and making sure that there are spaces where not only their contributions are valued, but that they feel safe, that they feel that they can be nurtured. And I think what I would like to see more institutions do is kind of really have a level of transparency, increased transparency in terms of what are you realistically able to offer to the folks who are a part of your institution? How are you able to communicate that in an authentic way, not in a, oh, this is what we're going to give you, and you know, these will be all the things that we will promise, when that may not realistically be what you can give them. So being transparent about what needs you're able to meet for your constituents, what needs you may not necessarily be able to meet. And also with that transparency, being open to having channels for regular feedback to figure out how you can better provide the things that you may not necessarily be able to provide. So I think transparency is something that I wish more institutions would lean into a little bit more. Of course, I know that there's a level of risk, you know, and liability with transparency, particularly when you're dealing with larger, more complex organizations. But I still think that there's value in figuring out how to take that risk in measured ways and think about how to be more transparent.
So I saw an interview you did where you spoke about education being both a tool of oppression and liberation. Like, how does this dual perspective inform your strategies for making higher ed more accessible?
So I'll give context to the statement first. So I mentioned a little bit growing up in Mississippi, and I literally just had this conversation maybe like a couple of days ago with someone, because they were talking about, I think they made the statement like, you know, I would never want to, you know, work or live in Mississippi. I can't imagine what it must be like. And I explained, I was like, it's honestly not very different from most other places in terms of like this concept of tension. I said, growing up, my friends and I often talk about this. We're spread all over, like my friends work in everywhere from San Diego to Atlanta to New York to Pennsylvania. And so we talk often about like how when we grew up, we didn't have a concept of racial tension. Like that just wasn't really a thing for us. Even though there was a very clear presence of separation of sorts, that wasn't a feeling that we kind of named in that way. We were just like, no, it just kind of was what it was. And so after we all left and we've kind of re-examined Mississippi with fresh eyes and new perspectives and new experiences, we're able to kind of pinpoint ways where, this is something that we probably, had we known this earlier, we might have made different decisions, but it was very intentional that we didn't know certain things. So when I talked about education being a tool for liberation and oppression, I think for us, we realized that in a lot of our curriculum growing up, you know, we weren't taught about some of the really powerful liberation movements that were happening out of Mississippi. We weren't really taught about some of the key historical figures. Like I didn't learn about people like Fannie Lou Hamer until much later in my early adult life. And had I had examples or had more intentional examples, I'll say, of what some of those things looked like at an earlier age, I might have been able to pinpoint what injustice looked like in different ways. And so when I talk about it being a tool for liberation and oppression, when you are able to give people access early to multiple perspectives, to multiple, like knowing that history doesn't have just one perspective, I think then you, one, allow people an opportunity to think about alternative solutions to a problem. I think two, you help people realize an awareness or have an increased awareness of like how different people working together usually is a much more sustainable solution to a problem. And then I think it helps people act more proactively to kind of prevent this idea of history from repeating in certain ways. And so I think because now what we're seeing is there's a very active and explicit attack on access to information and access to education, and thinking about how much we want people to know. You're seeing books getting banned that are being labeled as, controversial when they're really just a different perspective, or they're highlighting a different lived experience that's not considered mainstream. Those types of things are dangerous because they limit this idea of multiple solutions to a problem, or just multiple approaches in general. So I think that when we talk about it being a tool, we don't ever want to minimize the power of just knowing different things and having access to that.
So I've always been inspired by some of the things that you either post on social media or some of the things that you do in events. I remember it's actually in my office, probably. It's like the Black Woman Manifesto, and it has several quotes on there. And one of the reasons why I'm mentioning this, because again, we can't go on and on about your bio, but you do a lot more than just work in university and education and all of those things. What advice might you give to inspiring youth, inspiring people that want to create inclusive spaces, that want to do this type of work? What advice do you have for them?
I think I would give two pieces of advice. The first one is know that resistance is not a signal to stop. And so I think one of the things with, people keep asking like, oh, how are you handling, all the attacks on DEI? And I'm like, this kind of comes with the work. And it's not new players, new times, but not necessarily new battles. And so resistance doesn't mean that what you're doing is wrong. Resistance doesn't also mean that you shouldn't be doing it. At least not every time. Sometimes maybe, but most times it's not the only answer. So I think one, expect that resistance is a part of the work. That's the advice I would give. And then I think the biggest thing for me is reminding people to be authentic. I think what has been I feel like what I've been very fortunate to do is to be able to have spaces where I feel safe to be authentic. And I think me simply being who I am and trying to be that consistently in every space, unknowingly allows other people to feel like they can do that same thing. Yeah.
Tell me more about being authentic and that quote, fake it till you make it and things like that. How does that play when you're in different spaces? You may be the one of only. How are you able to be authentic, but yet at the same time not stand out so that you don't get the wrong type of attention? Or is that okay with you?
I don't believe in fake it till you make it.
I don't
at
either.
all.
So continue.
I don't believe in fake it till you make it. I also try really hard not to code switch. I know particularly for Black people, that is something, and we talk about like being in corporate spaces or being in other places. Like that's one of those things where I often have to say, like, what is it about you that feels like you need to adjust what you're doing in order to kind of be in this space where you feel like you have to change? Like, well, why should you change? I often used to tell people, if there are two people in a room, why are you the one that needs to be uncomfortable? Why are you the one that needs to be made to feel as if you need to switch and change? And what people don't realize is that when you ask those types of questions, you are actually challenging some of those power dynamics and some of these unconscious, structures that in these hierarchies that we're holding up. I mean, just by virtue of our conditioning of being in the United States. So I think that, again, there is a level of risk to being authentic. And so I often will just kind of ask myself, like, is this worth the risk? And you have to continuously ask that and reassess that in different situations and in different times. But I do think that is likely the way that I would tell people to do that.
So at Gies, we talk about our community being one in which everyone is seen, heard, and valued. With today's social and political environment, especially that of the, maybe the last few months in here in the spring of 2025, what are the challenges to leading our college efforts and building this sense of community?
Yeah. So I think it helps for us to kind of break down what we mean by seen, heard, valued. So when we're saying seen, it's going beyond, thinking about like what people look like, but thinking about who's actually in the community, who's in the college, who are the folks who you may not necessarily see on a regular basis. If you've ever walked into BIF or the Business Instructional Facility, and in our foyer, there's a seen, heard, valued mural of sorts, where everyone's name is there, but our marketing communications team and I were very intentional about the types of images that we put in the background. And so I said, do we have students who are wearing hijabs? Do we have students who might be using a wheelchair or have some different level of ability? Do we have any of our building service workers who we might be able to kind of highlight, people who you won't necessarily always see in the middle of a brochure, or people who you may not always see in a website? How do we make sure that they see themselves there as well? The heard part very much is probably what keeps me the busiest, of making sure once we have kind of, let ourselves be visible, let students and other people who are part of our community know that we are there, that invites lots of feedback. That invites lots of reasons of how we're not meeting a need. I get students who often have just dropped into my office because they're like, I walked by here and it said DEI. And I said, okay, maybe someone in here is who I need to tell about this concern. And so with each of those, it has even given me insight for a conversation maybe with a faculty member about a classroom accommodation, or maybe it's been conversations about prayer spaces in the building during Ramadan, or maybe it's been different situations where once someone has made us aware of something that they need, how do we kind of act to make sure that they have that? And then valued, I think, even as we're thinking about following the vision of Dean Elliott and thinking about all of our leadership, how do we use all of this new knowledge that now is continuously coming in to make sure that they see that their needs are really being intentionally interwoven in the way that we're building our strategic plan. What that looks like now is, often a lot of what we have to do is really kind of urgent in the sense of like, since January, I tell people we've had a little bit of a crisis to solve pretty much every week. And we often, other senior diversity officers and myself, meet weekly just to talk about things that are coming out at the federal level, thinking about as an institution, how can we be, again, proactive? And more than anything, how do we protect our faculty, our students, our staff, and make sure that they know that Illinois is standing firm on their values. Illinois is making sure that we are giving everyone what they need and making sure that their concerns are heard. So that's been it was an unexpected part of my semester and kind of what the leadership would look like. But I really feel fortunate to be doing this work here. I talk to colleagues at institutions at other places where they don't necessarily have that level of support. And they don't necessarily have that kind of mindset of like, how do we do what's best for our students and how do we do what's best for the institution, and how do we make those two things align, which is not always easy. But I think that because we are leading with that in mind, I feel confident in this moment that is something that we're going to continue to be able to do, even though things will likely remain uncertain.
So I'm going to dig just a little bit deeper into that. And I think when we talk about community and access and, in traditional DEI programs, there are some people that felt excluded in that. How are we including everyone in these conversations?
I think I always talk about people need to understand what DEI actually is. I think DEI, especially now, has been painted as this exclusionary thing that is only for certain people or is only for folks who have certain experiences. DEI is for everyone. DEI is about making sure that no matter who you are, no matter what experience you have, you are able to come into any space and have what you need. That's essentially the heart of equity work. And I think once we're able to help people understand like what that means for them, then I think they feel a little less intimidated by it. And I think they are also invited to learn more about what DEI looks like in action. I used an example I worked with a group of fraternity and sorority students a couple months ago. And I asked them, I was like, do any of you feel like if I asked you on the spot to define DEI, do you feel like you could? Very few hands went up. And I said, okay, let's think about it this way, right? So I said, think about if, you are in your dream career. I said, and you are like, you know what? I'm making it. This is everything I've worked for. I want to buy a penthouse suite. I said, okay, cool. So everyone has your penthouse, right? And I said, you are in the best health of your life. You have a penthouse suite, and you are, just there every day, like you can just do whatever you want. And so I said, imagine that you have an armful of groceries and you're going to your penthouse and there's no elevator. Is this dream still as fun? And, they're like, I don't know about this. Like, do you still want to be in the penthouse of this 34 level high rise? And I said, do you need the elevator though? Like, you're in good shape. You can carry your groceries just fine. And so I said, but if there is an elevator for someone who can't do that, does it still help you? And they were like, okay, yeah, I could see how this is still helpful. And just because you don't necessarily need the elevator, it doesn't mean that it doesn't benefit you. But by thinking about the person who it could benefit, there's still a level of access and a level of improvement to your daily life that could still help someone. So that was a very simplified aspect of it, but it's just one aspect of even though there's something that may not necessarily benefit you because of your conditions, your lifestyle, your needs, it could benefit someone else. And by thinking about them, you still also may have some level of benefit.
Thanks for sharing, Tekita. I'm going to transition us to some personal questions.
Okay.
So what are some of the personal habits or routines that you think have contributed to your success?
Oh, I love therapy.
Tell us more. Let's plug therapy.
Yes,
Here we go.
I have an amazing therapist that I have seen. I've been with her at least for probably about 7.5 years or so, but I have probably gone to therapy maybe like nine years. I have a standing appointment every other week, and especially now I make sure I keep it. And even if there's no crisis, I think it's just helpful to have a space that I know I can use as a non-judgmental space to just process the world and think about what's happening. For me personally, my faith is really important. And so I use that to just kind of help find a grounding and just remember my why and remember why I'm doing the things that I'm doing, and also keeping it in the grand scheme of things that in the big picture, this is just my job. But I have a life, and I have people who matter outside of my job. I have people who, I care very deeply about. I am a proud auntie and godmother, so they bring a lot of joy to my world, and so I like to keep that in perspective. I think my faith helps me do that. I am a caregiver, and so for me, because of that, I'm really good about expressing and respecting and enforcing boundaries about, what that looks like in terms of protecting my capacity and thinking about how do I, listen to my body before it gets to the point where there's nothing left to give. That takes practice. I don't always do it well, but I try really hard to be mindful of thinking about how can I do that. I always tell people I absolutely hate the analogy of, if the plane is going down, and put your mask on before you help other people. I hate it. I think it's dumb because, I think.
Tell us more.
Yeah, because I talked about this with a group of women that I said, why do we have to wait for the plane to crash to remember to breathe? And why do we have to really kind of wait until we're in crisis to say, oh, okay, I should take care of myself. And then I should be thinking about what I need to do for everyone else, when it's we should just focus on breathing. I want us to not get into this habit to only think in that way when there's an emergency and it's life or death. It shouldn't get to that point. So I kind of pop people's bubble a little bit with that one, because I'm I don't like this because I still think it reinforces this me last mentality, or I only care for myself in crisis.
That's fantastic. I'll never hear that analogy the same way again. But
that
I
was
really
your first
that.
time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So one of the central themes of our podcast here is the idea of feedback and the value of feedback. Mm-hmm. So the question we have for you is there a piece of feedback that you received that was really tough to hear, but eventually made you better?
I think about different feedback from my mentors. I am a person who often has something to contribute and often has something to say or an opinion to share. And I think collectively, I don't even think it was really just one of my mentors, but I think I was often told to speak less and listen more. And I found it to be most helpful, like whenever I'm starting anything new. And I just shared this advice with some students at an event a few weeks ago, is that, as you're entering your career, you're entering different fields, you're going to be super energetic. You're going to have lots of ideas. And that's not to say don't have those ideas, but there is value in listening and learning the landscape of like, okay, what happens here? How did they get here? There might be something that happened before I got here that I may not necessarily know about. And how do I use that information to really strengthen the ideas and the contributions that I want to share? I think early in my career, I was very much like, okay, I got an idea. We need to do it right now. And I often missed opportunities to kind of learn how best to kind of strategize that, maybe figure out people who could help me get these things done, because I was just so ready to act. And so I think now I have learned to pause and listen a lot more. And that's not to say don't speak up, because I definitely don't believe in being silenced or silencing others. But I think that there's time and place. And I think that there's lots more value in listening and learning before thinking about how to contribute.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that.
So in the spirit of Candid Conversations, can you share with us and our listeners and viewers what most people don't know about you?
Oh, I don't know. I was trying to think about that.
I know. It's a hard question. I don't know why Chris insists that we ask this
I was
each
like,
time.
I know. I'm like, I'm such an open book. Well, okay. I don't know that most people know that I'm a writer. So yeah, I'm thinking about that. I don't know that a lot of people know that about me. I talk a lot and I do lots of workshops and stuff, but my writing is my first love. And so and as long as I can remember, I've written poetry, short stories. Like I've recently gotten back into writing a lot of poetry. I often don't share it, so I hope people don't ask me because it's very personal.
Non-published writing. It's okay.
It's a gift to yourself.
Yeah, I do have that, but I do have published writing too. So I'm super excited about. I have 2 chapters coming out that are about my work as a cultural center professional. Nice. So one of the chapters is with one of my great friends and colleagues, Tekita Bankhead, and we are writing about mitigating misogynoir. So it really talks about the experiences of Black women who are leading women's resources centers and Black cultural centers. So talking about the sexist experiences that can happen, or the racialized experiences that can happen in either space. And then in the other one, I'm writing with 2 of my friends, Dr. Tristan Johnson and also Dr. Jamal Myrick, and we're writing about plantation politics and talking about how do we fill the gaps in support for mid-level cultural center professionals. So those are 2 academic things that are coming out here soon. And those are edited by Dr. Jonathan McElderry and Dr. Stephanie Diaz, excuse me. And something that's a little less academic, I'm writing a chapter that's coming out in an anthology about Black women in workplace trauma. And so that kind of is a little more, I won't say informal, a little less academic, and really touches more on the mental health pieces that I like to kind of write about. So those manifestos, of like things with the Pedestal Project, and that, I don't think I talked a lot about that, but the Pedestal Project is an outside project that I have that specifically focuses on Black women, and it's about healing Black women through creative writing and through spaces for networking and just fellowship in general. So I used to do these brunches that hopefully I'll get started again at some point. I keep getting that question from people. So once life settles down, I'm going to kind of restart some of those.
Why is it called the Pedestal Project?
Oh, so there's a story. So it's connected to therapy. So I was in a space in my life where I found myself to be super overwhelmed, and I went to actually campus therapy. I always give credit to, it was at the time it was faculty staff assistants or whatever. I think faculty staff assistance program is probably the name of it. And I was dealing with an intern. I still remember she was super great. I don't remember her name, but I do remember that she was an intern that I was seeing. And, I was sharing all these different things about what was happening and how I was feeling. I was dealing with a recent breakup and just some other stuff that was happening. And she asked me this question, and she said, do you realize that you put everyone else on this pedestal, except yourself. And I said, I don't know a Black woman who doesn't. And so that was kind of this idea of this idea of the pedestal complex. And so I was like, how do we shift this and create a space where Black women know that they can put themselves first, their stories first, their experiences first, their concerns first. And that was kind of where the idea of the pedestal project came from. And so I started that in about, what was that, 2018-ish? And so it was really kind of took form here in Champaign, and it has been something that's still a baby for me. As I was having life transitions, I had to put it to the side for a little while. So now I'm thinking about all the ways that I want to reimagine it. And I have lots of things in the pipeline that I'm excited about. So hopefully we'll be able to get those started before the end of the year too.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. Finally, as we wrap up today, what do you hope that our listeners and viewers take away from this conversation?
One of my heroes is Toni Morrison. And I literally just posted this quote yesterday, but I think it is just very salient about, when you get these jobs that you're so brilliantly trained for, if you're free, then your job is to free someone else. And if you have power, then your job is to empower someone else. Very loosely quoted. And so for me, I truly feel like that is my why. If I have found a level where I can be my truest, most authentic, most empathetic, most giving, most useful self, I want people to be able to figure out how to do that in their own way, and in a way that brings them joy, and in a way that brings them fulfillment. So I hope that, honestly, me just being me has helped people figure out, how to just be themselves in their spaces as well.
Thank you so much for the conversation today. I'm glad the universe finally shone light on us and allowed us to have this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate you taking the time today to share your wisdom with us and our listeners and viewers. Thank you.
I had a great time. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone.